Welcome, listeners and lurkers. This is Helping Hands, therapy notes from our multidimensional chaos. I'm January Garnet, and I'm here with my co host.
Lady Lily.
Today's topic is spirituality. Now, we're going to be talking about lots of different things, spirituality concerned. We may touch on some religious trauma, so trigger warning if that's something that's not for you. But we'll try to do touch on different points, and we're going to talk about what it means for us and how it affects us. And so to begin, we're going to start with a quote that I thought would be appropriate for today. It's by a favorite poet of mine. His name is Khalil Gibran, and he was a Lebanese American poet, artist, philosopher. And this quote is actually from a book that he wrote called The Prophet. And it's really a book of poetry, or prose, because it's not necessarily rhyming, but it kind of tells the story of a man who spent a lot of time on this island just learning and learning from the people around him and just becoming part of this community, and very, very loved and appreciated. And so the book actually starts off with him realizing that it's time for him to leave. His time on this island has come to an end. And as he's leaving, all the people in the village are like, "Tell us what you've learned. Tell us all the things that you've learned. What about this subject? What about this subject?" Um, and so this particular quote is from when he's talking about self-knowledge, which I thought was appropriate for today's topic of spirituality. And he says, "The self is a sea, boundless and measureless. Say not, I have found the truth, but rather I have found a truth. For the soul walks on all paths. The soul walks not upon a line, neither does it grow like a reed. The soul unfolds itself like a lotus of countless petals."
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I thought that was appropriate because spirituality looks different for different people, and it's not necessarily in a linear line. So, all right, well,
Yeah, for sure.
let's definitely get into it. Lily, would you like to read the definition that we have here for spirituality?
Sure. So, the definition is taken from the Merriam-Webster and Oxford dictionaries, and it says for spirituality or spiritual, the quality of being concerned with a human spirit or soul as opposed to material or physical things.
Okay, awesome. So, defining spirituality is complicated because it's definitely a subjective experience. And so, don't mind my garbage people in the background. Um, so, yeah, spirituality is different for different people. And so it can be specifically tied to a religion, or it can just be about asking questions about the world around you. And depending on how somebody defines spirituality for themselves will determine their search looks like. So that brings us to what our personal definition of spirituality is. And why don't you go ahead and go first, Lily, and tell us about what does spirituality mean to you?
So, spirituality is very confusing to me. Um, I used to believe spirituality was the belief in God, as in the Christian uh Yahweh, God. Um, but since I pulled myself away from the religion, I've kind of lost my way of figuring it out. Um, but I believe I mostly believe in the concept of a soul to some extent, because what are we? Who am I? Why do I exist? Sometimes I believe or rather hope that there is more to this than what we have on this earth, but I can't quantify a soul. It's not tangible, but we exist somehow, right? So spirituality to me is asking the questions and the search for who am I?
Right. Okay. Yeah, we were talking a little bit about this before the podcast, and you were saying something really interesting that um, you actually said something like you don't feel like you have spirituality, and
Yeah.
we had talked about that being possibly because your definition of spirituality for so long had involved a belief in God, but since it no longer involves a belief in a deity or a God, it's almost like, well, do I have spirituality? And the way that we defined it, we looked it up in the dictionary, and then the way you just defined it, definitely, I would say that you have spirituality because you're still asking those questions and still looking for honest answers to those questions. And what better way to define spirituality than that, just to explore the world around you?
Yeah, for sure.
I think it means something similar for me as well. It's the process of seeking to find and understand meaning behind our external world and how it relates to my internal world.
Mhm.
Um, this to me, for the spirit is something really hard to define, and it's intangible and unmeasurable. Trying to define it and, like you said, quantify it is really difficult and complicated. Um, So my view of spirituality is different, even though I come also from a religious background. It's more about the process of just trying to understand my place in this world, minus a deity, like minus religion and what that looks like. And so I would say that that search to understand myself and the world around me would be called spirituality, and like asking those questions that you said, why am I here? Where am I going?
Yeah.
And
That's
so,
it's
oh, sorry, go ahead.
definitely I was just gonna say that it definitely echoes just how similar we are, that a lot of our stuff is nearly the same answers, just maybe phrased in a different way.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it that kinda brings us to our next segment about what our history with spirituality is, and here's where it's gonna get tricky because I think that our both of our unique experiences, I say unique because we're different people and,
Mhm.
but like you said, so many different similarities as far as what messages were imprinted on us
Yeah.
in the religions that we were raised in.
Yeah, for sure.
So, if you why don't you go ahead and talk about what your personal history with is spirituality?
Okay. So, I started out being brought up in, like I said, the Christian religion. Um, my should I say denomination was non-denominational for the most part. Some of the churches we went to were denominations of like Church of God or something like that. But for the most part, we kind of searched out non-denominational. Um, but I
Just
thought spiritual.
for those
Go ahead.
who don't know what non-denominational is, and that also is kind of me. What does that mean?
It means that you don't so in I guess the Christian conglomeration of denominations. There's different denominations that have different um interpretations of the Bible,
Okay.
and so they've kind of separated off, just kind of like similar to like how the I can't remember what the first one is, but the Quakers
Mhm.
separated off back in early US history.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of in the same way a schism happens. They have a disagreement on interpretations, and they break off and become their own denomination. And so non-denominational generally means that because they've become like almost corporations. So they have heads of this giant denomination and elders and stuff like that. And so non-denominational doesn't have that. They don't subscribe to a corporation.
Gotcha.
They're just their own church, and they can believe in various different manners of so you have to kind of go to their church and see if their beliefs align with yours, and there's no set, like, okay, Church of God believes this way, or Baptist believes this way, or Church of technically Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is technically under that, but they're Mormon, so that's a little different. Um, but they all have their different beliefs. And, like, it's funny because I ended up going to a and there's Pentecostal as well. That's another one. And I went to a church school when I was little, and it was so interesting, and it was very frustrating, but because we didn't hold the same beliefs they did. And they were considered Baptist as their church, but they practice more Pentecostal beliefs. So one of
Mhm.
the things in Pentecostal is, well, two of the things is that you can't women can't wear pants. And another thing is that women should be silent in the church. So they can't be preachers or anything like, they can be missionaries, but they can't be pastors, they can't be preachers, they can't anything like that. And
Mhm.
my grandmother was actually an Elaine minister. So it's a minister without a church. Um
Interesting.
and she they would tell me that your grandmother is not a minister. She can be a missionary, but she's not a minister. I'm like, no, my grandma is a minister. She has her minister's license, and because, yeah, you have to be licensed. There is church Christian colleges that license ministers. And so, like, she went through all that. I'm like, no, she's a minister. She could have a church if she wanted to, but she doesn't. She just ministers to people throughout life, you know. And they're like, she's a missionary. And I'm like, no, she's not. And another thing that they believed is that the Bible was a holy text. And so you couldn't put anything on top of the Bible. The Bible had to be on top of everything.
Mhm.
And so, like, when cleaning out my desk, I would get in trouble because since the Bible had to be the first thing in my desk, it would be the first thing on the floor. And thus things got piled on top of it. And I
Oh,
would get in trouble and I would have to take my Bible out from under everything else and set it to the side until I put everything else and then set it on top of everything. It was I think now completely idiotic,
yeah, that's
but
wild.
that is my personal opinion on religion. But so yeah, so I started in the Christian religion, and I thought spirituality was as to be as close to be God as I could be. Eventually I saw the hypocrisy that was so deeply rooted in religion, and the religion specifically, and the hate that lay beneath it. There's so much, and the thing is, and there's bad things in plenty of things to judge harshly in the Bible, but there's also good messages in the Bible. And it frustrated me, and the hypocrisy of it was that they would talk about being this way and being like God, but then they would go and treat people badly. And
Yeah.
so I left the religion. Um I was kind of adrift for a while, not really knowing what I believed, and just kind of pushing it to it's whatever, it doesn't really matter. But it was so hard for me to let go of the thought of a deity who created us because it was so deeply ingrained into my upbringing.
Mhm.
Um, I ended up meeting some people that called themselves Wiccans, uh, and I so desperately wanted to fit in. I wanted to believe in something, so I latched onto that and started delving into the mysticism, which then led me to paganism. To the point that I actually had a pagan priest oversee my hand fasting. Which, for those of you that don't know what a hand fasting is, it's an ancient tradition symbolizing the joining of two people, and is sufficient to be called a marriage. Now, for me, we did have a marriage license, but just you don't have, even to have a wedding. You don't have to have a marriage license. You can just perform a wedding and be whatever.
Right.
But you know, it's akin to the same thing as a wedding, and been used in multiple different cultures and religions. Um, but for a while, I had my own beliefs that I didn't follow a single tradition, such as believing that all the gods existed and maybe one is the same between pantheons, just different aspects or names of the gods. Um, then someone else ended up uh, pointing out to me that maybe the gods aren't infallible, and that they make mistakes too. And that was an interesting concept to me. I hadn't thought about that because I was always raised that God is infallible. So if there's different deities, then they must be infallible too. But I you know left that, and you know I wanted to believe so much that whatever um you wanted, as like I ended up coming to the belief that whatever you wanted as your afterlife was what you were going to have. So if you wanted to go to heaven, you were going to create this heaven that you went to, or whatever it was. So if you believed you were going to hell, then you would probably go to a dystopian or kind of infernal location. Um, but as time and circumstance continued within my life and the world around me, I lost belief in a higher power or God in all intents, because I couldn't see a deity that was supposed to be good would allow the horrors that not only happened to me, but that happened in the world around me. Um, I decided that even if there was some sort of higher power or powers, then they weren't worth devotion because they weren't altruistic. If they were good, they wouldn't require worship in order to be considered for their afterlife, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so finally, I've settled on agnostic atheism, that I don't know if there is or is not a deity or deities or higher powers of any sort. I just don't think that we as humans have the ability to currently know. And again, I don't want to bow down to anyone just because they're more powerful to me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I had a very similar history with religion and spirituality. I
Mhm.
was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. Um, my mother and father were both in the religion. And so, um, for those of you who don't know who Jehovah's Witnesses are, they are a very high control religion. Um, very, they wouldn't call themselves a cult, of course, but they really are, because they do advocate for separating yourself from your friends and family or anybody who doesn't believe the same things that they do.
Mhm.
Which is how I was raised. I was raised to not be allowed to really make close friends at school. I wasn't allowed to go to after school anything. Couldn't go
Yeah.
to dances.
Mhm.
I couldn't have friends spend the night. I could only have
Mhm.
friends that were Jehovah's Witnesses,
Yeah.
which made connection really difficult. Um, so growing up as a Jehovah's Witness was where a lot of the trauma came from, the high control, the judgment, um, and if we do another episode is regarding religious trauma, we can go into detail as far as
Mhm.
all the things that happened. But I
Yeah.
whatever trauma that you can imagine that you could have in religion is what happened.
Yeah, for sure.
um, and thank goodness, though, I met I was my husband I met my husband there. We grew up in the same congregation, and we became really good friends, and I think we were both in the same place, mentally and emotionally and spiritually. And when we got married, we sort of left the religion together.
Mhm.
Once we were out on our own and could make our own decisions, we could see that, yeah, this is really not what we wanted. Um, as far as the organized aspect of it. I could see that the organization was deeply, deeply flawed, and I wanted to have nothing to do with it. But in leaving the organization, I was like, well, I still wanted to believe in the God of the Bible, that I was taught with.
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, I could just worship Jehovah without the organization, because
Mhm.
that's my personal relationship.
Yeah, for sure.
And I held on to that for a while. I could, like you were saying, it's really difficult to let go of that concept of a deity or a heavenly father.
Mhm.
Um, and I didn't really want to let it go because that thought was comforting to
Oh,
me.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
But then it started to change because there's a lot of, because the religion is such a high control religion, there's a lot of high risk in not following every single tenet, every single
Mhm.
thing that they want you to do. And so there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of just intense guilt, and to the point where I started to believe that I did not have any value, because if God didn't love me, then my life didn't matter. And so I there was one night where I actually tried to harm myself.
Mhm.
And but that same night I realized that that was the thinking that brought me there. And so, I don't know why, but something inside said, okay, you know what? If this God who was taught to me is supposedly to be a God of love, if he really thinks that about me, then he's not worth worshiping.
Yeah.
And so I started just letting go of that, letting go of this concept of God, this judgmental thug that was in supposedly in this existential place that was looking down and judging me. I just couldn't, it didn't make any sense.
Mhm.
So I kind of did what you did. I looked into a lot of different things that I thought were connected to spirituality. I have always been somebody who was a fan of nature. And so it started looking into like Native American religions and a lot of ancient religions like Celtic religions and um, South American religions like Toltec
Mhm.
knowledge and stuff. And I found a lot of similarities, a lot of basic tenets that sort of everybody learns as they're growing up, just like the golden rule, treat others how you want to be treated. That principle has been throughout human history
Yeah.
for as you could just find it anywhere. And um I was always a big fan of the Greek pantheon, the Greek gods, because I felt like, oh, there's a god for everybody, You can pick
Yeah.
one that you identify with, and the gods themselves aren't necessarily perfect, they're flawed, it's relatable. That felt, even though I didn't really necessarily believe that those deities existed, I just enjoyed the symbology of it. And I still
Mhm.
do. I still do. But again, I would never like, I'm not the kind of person that feels like it's important to attach myself to a deity because they just don't exist for me.
Yeah, I get that because like for me, I also um I still have a Lilith symbol and that's where my name came from of
Right.
Lady
Yeah.
Lily.
Yeah.
And so I still, while I don't necessarily wholeheartedly believe that she exists, that symbolism I still hold dear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I did the same thing. In fact, there's a portion of my life where I called myself Lilith, and then I called myself Morgaine from the Arthurian um, legendarium, and because
Mhm.
these were sort of these powerful feminine um, figures that I felt connected to at the time of my life. And
Yeah.
so, I just going through all these different types of spiritualities and beliefs. And um, I got to the point where I was like, okay, I could see that there's a lot of this that is just basic common sense that
Yeah.
has been colored to make,
Mhm.
with all these different symbols, which is fine for. And then I tried, okay, psychology has always been something that's interesting to me too. So I tried to figure out how can I connect psychology or the scientific aspect of it to religion or spirituality. So I tried these different, I went to therapy for a long time. I was in Al Anon, which is basically like AA for families of friends of addicts. And they have a little bit of a spirituality there because they encourage you to believe in a higher power, but they don't necessarily, they don't say that you have to believe in a God, just a higher power. And
Yeah.
during that experience, I was like, okay, well, maybe music can be my higher power, or the ocean, or something that's bigger than me. That was how I
Mhm.
interpreted it. But it still just didn't feel quite right. Also, Al Anon is and AA is really like, unfortunately, there's a lot more toxic principles that are shared than positive
Mhm.
ones. And
Yeah.
just as a side tangent, it's about a 50% success rate, which is
Mhm.
basically the same if you tried to recover from addiction on your own. So
Yeah. My
just a
mom was
note.
actually in AA,
Oh,
Alcoholics
really?
Anonymous. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I remember going to all those meetings, and sometimes I would sit in the meetings, sometimes I would sit in the kids' room.
Yeah, the meeting aspect of it, and the group, as far as like being able to come together and talk about stuff, I feel is really beneficial. But some of their beliefs are kind of skewed. So
Yeah.
I would tell anyone to just kind of be careful and, put your
Mhm.
critical thinking hat on.
Oh, for sure.
Um, so then I thought, well, this isn't really for me. It's kind of started feeling like the same kind of organized religion politics that I had already experienced. So I tried something
Mhm.
else. I started studying the law of attraction, which is, a lot of people may have been introduced to that principle through that movie, The Secret. Um, it's basically a philosophy that is based on the belief that whatever you focus on, whatever you put your energy towards, is what you're going to attract. So you probably heard people, well, I'm going to manifest this in my life. That is
Yes.
part of the law of attraction. Um, Now, I really strongly believe this for a long time because I thought, well, it makes sense, it's like karma, like what you put out there is what you're going to get back, kind of thing. But then I started hearing more and more people who are involved in this law of attraction, because I started going to meetings and stuff, and they all were into this manifesting. And I remember having an experience where this lady was, talking about, oh, well, this is what I manifested this week. And she started talking about how, um, she parked her car in the wrong place and didn't get charged. And she interpreted that as manifesting that for herself because she couldn't afford the charge. And that just made no logical sense to me at all. I was just
Yeah.
like, wow, she's really just reaching and interpreting this whole thing and making conclusions based on just air. And so then I was like, okay, this doesn't feel honest to me anymore. This doesn't feel tangible. This isn't for me. So I left that. Then I tried some Eastern religions. And while I really enjoy a lot of Eastern religion beliefs and philosophies because they are more about looking inward and taking personal
Mhm.
responsibility, I could not get the hang of meditation, probably because I'm ADHD and autistic at the same time. So I just couldn't get the hang of it.
Yeah, for real.
Um, and then there's this really entrenched belief that you just have to let go of your desires,
Mhm.
and that doesn't seem realistic as a human to
Yeah,
me.
no.
So I was like, okay, this doesn't work for me. So that left me with what has always been reliable for me is science.
Mhm.
Now, by this time, I had been out of religion or in my religious search, spiritual search, for like a decade. And a lot of things happened in that time. And around that time, I left my husband. Well, we separated amicably. And I met my current partner, who is definitely a lot more science minded. And he really helped me to sort of explore the scientific aspect of it. And it started, we watched a video. It was called Cosmos, and it was basically a remade version of what Carl Sagan did back in the 70s about science and
Mhm.
astronomy. And it was hosted by Neil deGrasse Tyson. And it was about evolution. And I was taught as a Jehovah's Witness that evolution was not real.
Yeah, it was evil.
Yeah, this was, and it was all faked evidence and all this stuff, which is a lie,
Mhm.
which is, it's
Yeah,
not true.
I remember
And
that.
the concept of evolution is way more miraculous, in my opinion, more beautiful than the creation story.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and I would encourage anybody to, look into it more if they're curious. But it really changed my entire outlook on how to ask those questions that I had been continuously asking, and where to look.
Mhm.
And and I just kind of started there, and I started really just feeding my mind with more science and more things that inspired my curiosity and made me ask better questions.
Mhm.
And during the pandemic, when we had lots of time, I ended up coming across a lot of atheists um shows on YouTube. And some of them, are just there to be angry and spew rhetoric, but there's several that are very, very reasonable, and they encourage a lot of critical thinking and responsible debate. And that really
Mhm.
helped me to get a lot of clarity and to become comfortable with saying, I don't know, to some of these questions.
Mhm.
Um, and so I am also an agnostic atheist. I'm probably more of a hard atheist because I just, with all the arguments and attempts for people to bring evidence forward, there's just none that holds up.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so I would definitely describe myself more as a hard atheist, but I'm also agnostic because I just don't know for sure. Um, and so that's kind of where I've been at for the past 5 years. Just and I'm using those same principles that I used to deconstruct my religious background, using that same critical thinking to just deconstruct other indoctrination, like racism and just capitalism and just living in this society. And I feel
Mhm.
like that's really helped me also in a spiritual sense, because it does help me figure out where I belong in
Yeah.
this world, and how to proceed. What do I do? And it for me, what it came down to was that I get to assign meaning
Mhm.
to things that are important to me. And it also meant that I create my morality based on empathy, which means that I get to believe what I want to believe. I accept that other people get to believe what they want to believe. And as long as neither one of us is devaluing the other person's humanity based on those beliefs,
Mhm.
then I'm good.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's kind of where I've been at.
Yeah, and like, um, I was gonna say something. Give me a second. Um, that yeah, I agree with that. There's not sufficient evidence to prove or disprove, you know, uh, existence of a higher power of any sort. And also on the meditation thing, I have tried that as well, and my brain doesn't shut up. I can't focus. I can't. Just does not work. But
Yeah. And I've also learned that meditation looks different for different people now. Like,
mhm.
I think for a long time I thought that meditation had to look like, a monk sitting crisscross applesauce and,
Oh yeah.
being quiet and listening to soft music or whatever. And I don't think that may work for some people, But I think that also for people with neurodivergent minds, we need a different environment
Mhm.
to quote unquote meditate, because I think the goal of meditation is to sort of help ground and center yourself. So I think
Hmm.
whatever we do in life that helps us to accomplish that could be considered meditation. So for
Interesting.
for me, that might be listening to music and playing a video game, because that's activating certain parts of my brain that help me feel like I'm in control. And so that helps me to feel grounded.
Or something that you can do that helps you focus on yourself and think inward.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
And that could
cuz
be art or whatever.
yeah, for sure, cuz like that that definitely when I'm doing my art and stuff, I'm I think about things and a lot of times, but it's really funny actually in the mornings, in a lot of mornings, that's when I do my thinking, I guess, and my questioning. So I'll have like my husband will get up and it takes him hours to wake up. And I'll be like, "Hey, I've got all these existential questions and comments and things. I just need to talk them out." And he's just like, I'm like, just be a sounding board. Just say, uh huh, just because I tried having these conversations with him, and he's like, I can't, I don't know, I can't answer, I can't do this. And so I was like, okay, so you don't have to necessarily engage too much. I just need to talk.
Yeah.
But I would sit and I would do research and just ask these questions and delve into myself and think about myself, and I do that on a lot of mornings.
Yeah, morning times for me too is very similar to that. Like it's like my brain is the most active in the morning,
Mhm.
and I just all the questions, like every question ever is just popping up.
Yeah. I've dear God, I've gone to so many like, what is this? Okay, what is this? What is this? Okay, following this link, what is this? What is the source for this? And what
Yeah.
is this? And just rabbit trails after rabbit trails going off on different things that still has connection to what I'm looking at, but just finding new questions to ask because of the things that you're looking up.
Yeah. Exactly. I know exactly how that feels. Well, that kind of leads us into our next question, which is how do our views on spirituality influence our thoughts and ideas about other things in life?
Oh,
What does that look like for you?
see, for me, my views on spirituality don't seem to really impact my life much because, at least on the surface, I don't really think about it. In my day to day life, I don't. It doesn't come up. I don't, go, well, oh, my spirituality says this. For the most part, or at least I don't phrase it that way.
Yeah.
There are times, like I said before, that I go into like existentialism and questioning, who are we? These morning times.
Mhm.
Um, but for the most part, it doesn't really, or at least in my perception, I don't see that it, plays a part in my ideas or life because I tend to focus on like the tangible, the physical, what we can measure, science. At least, at current date. That may change in the future. Never know what the future brings. And, as new sciences arise to explain new things, of course I'll reassess, and my beliefs and stuff will shift because I too definitely believe in the science of things, you know. But for the most part, I don't really put much stock or value in it because I just try to live a good life and be the best person I can be, sans spirituality or religion.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes
But
sense.
but that reminds me of what we were talking about before the podcast. So that you said that really was still spirituality.
Hmm.
And that made me, kind of look at it a little differently and go, okay, so maybe that is my spirituality, is that I ask those questions and that I am comfortable with saying I don't know
Right.
and just leaving it as an open-ended question, but being comfortable with knowing that I don't know and those things aren't knowable right now.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that you started out by saying your views on spirituality don't impact your life. And I think that because we were both brought up in Christianity, which tends to basically teach, I think almost every Christian religion will teach that your spirituality is the most important thing in your
Yeah.
life. And that's all part of that indoctrination. And so to get to
Mhm.
the point where you can appropriately prioritize spirituality in its rightful place, which is not number one. It might be number 5 or number 10,
Mhm.
where it's more like it falls in line with more of just being curious about life. And
Mhm.
it has lower stakes as far as answering those questions. I think that that is probably one of the healthiest positions you can have regarding spirituality and religion, because having that be the number one priority when you're young, or at any time in your life, feels unrealistic and unfair. It's kind of a dismissal of being human, just
Yeah, and
having a
dismissal
human
of you
existence.
as yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay.
But yeah, dismissal of you as a person.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that that's kind of, it's not even that spirituality got demoted. I guess it did, but in a healthy way, to the point where it's not a big deal. It's just
Yeah.
there. And I think for me, I haven't really found a definition of spirit or spirituality that doesn't sound subjective,
Mhm.
or one that feels like it has demonstrable evidence to support. It's just kind of an idea and a concept that whatever that person thinks it is.
Ooh, so
Um,
one question real quick.
yeah.
What is that word that you just said?
Which one? Demonstrable evidence?
Yes.
Demonstrable means or demonstratable.
Oh, okay.
Be able
That
to demonstrate.
that I just never heard it pronounced that way. So that that's why I was like, "Ooh, that's a new word for me."
Yeah, it's actually, I learned it again from the atheist shows that I watch, from
Oh,
these
interesting.
professional debaters that, and I mean, nobody's expected to be a professional debater in real life as when it comes to spirituality, but I definitely learn a lot of new terms that, and I love
Mhm.
words. Just as a side tangent, I love words because it helps me to really express a specific idea. So
Yes.
that word is really important as far as when it comes to evidence for me. But
Mhm.
there's a lot of different accepted definitions of spirit and spirituality, and some of them, might entail, oh, it's your life force or your soul. And again, all of those, you try to, well, what's your life force? What is your soul? And you look at the definitions of those, and they're just as sort of ethereal and intangible. So if spirituality is an intangible thing, how do we make it tangible?
Mhm.
And I think for me, the answer is maybe we don't. Maybe we get comfortable with accepting that not everything can be known to us. Um, Maybe recognize that some things in life, like I was saying before, we get to assign meaning or value. And it's not really up to some intangible force that has yet to be demonstrated. And so the bottom line for me is that I want to believe in as many true things as possible and not believe in false things. And the most reliable methodology to do that, to figure out what's true versus what's false, is the scientific method.
Mhm.
And so, and using critical thinking and logic and reason. And that's how I approach trying to answer these questions that others would consider that fall into the spirituality category. So, like, for example, there's a lot of people that believe in the supernatural.
Mhm.
And I used to be one of them. That was one thing that when I first left the organization, I was super into like ghost hunting and ghosts
Yeah.
and past life experiences and reincarnation. And I watched so many shows and so many documentaries about it. And every time I watched it, I would get so angry and frustrated because I felt like the people investigating were not asking the right questions.
Yeah, for
And they were
sure.
just accepting what they saw without asking why or
We're
and that was just so,
investigating it.
yeah, it was just so frustrating to me. And it's like, clearly there's people are experiencing things, but there's
Mhm.
so many different uh candidate reasons other than it being supernatural to explain what's happening that they were not considering. They were just automatically concluding, oh, this must be supernatural because it looks like a ghost to me, which
Yeah.
is not based on anything real or scientific. It's literally just saying something it's saying an opinion. It's called making an assertion. So
Yeah.
it's basically saying an opinion without having any evidence, which is
Mhm.
like, how is that a way to find out what's true? And to me, it didn't seem reliable. So
Yeah, for sure.
that's kind of how I approach things these days. Um, and it's really important to do that now because there's so much false information out there.
Mhm.
And so let's say I've been coming across these videos lately of like natural disasters,
Mhm.
and I can tell that it's being made by an AI. It's clearly not real. But then you go into the comments and it's like so many people in the comments are like, "Oh my gosh, this is so scary." And it's like they're believing what they're seeing without asking any question.
Yeah.
And I can't I just can't relate to that.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I just can't. And I'm so glad that I can. And I hope that I get opportunities to interact with people like that and ask them questions and be like, "Hey, why
Oh,
do you
yeah.
believe this? What is it that's convincing you that this is real?" And then just kind of go from there.
That's
Um,
yeah. Because like, I would honestly like to have without I would like to have without a heated argument,
yeah.
just a conversation with some of these, religious people, Christians and stuff that believe these ways, and ask them these critical thinking questions and try to understand, where they're coming from. But and to pose these questions for them and make them think about them and go, okay, well, what evidence do we have?
Yes, exactly. In
And
fact, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, you go ahead because mine is going to be a tangent.
I was just going to say what you're describing is called street epistemology. And it's basically the process of um, doing that. There's this one particular guy, I love him so much. His name is Anthony Magnabosco.
That's a
And
last name.
right? But he's great. He'll go and he'll just set up like a booth and he'll just talk to people and be like, "Hey, do you want to talk about what you believe and why?" And he will do that, and people will ask. He'll just ask them questions. Well, what convinces you? And it's just a very respectful conversation about what they believe and why, and asking. It's teaching people to ask those questions, those critical
Yeah.
thinking questions that maybe those questions hadn't occurred to them in the past. And
Mhm.
I know for me, speaking from my experience, I think that being in a high control religion for so long, a lot of those questions didn't occur to me, you
Yeah, for
know,
sure.
because it's such a black and white way of thinking, you know.
Mhm.
So having somebody ask those questions in a really respectful way it's a safe way to confront your beliefs that maybe are foundational, and it might feel upsetting to question. But using that street epistemology method, it's a little bit easier to ease into rather than having somebody go, "Well, why do you believe in God? That's dumb." That's kind of an
Yeah, for
attack.
sure.
So, but I'm
But
sorry, what were you gonna say, were you about your tangent?
my my tangent was just that because I don't think that I'm smart, and there's to be fair, there is so much evidence to say that I am. And even when I was younger, I was told that I was very smart, but that also went with them also telling me that I was just lazy. The standard when you have ADHD or autism and they just, dismiss it and say you're just lazy.
Yeah.
Um, but it dawned it or rather it didn't dawn on me. It reminded me when you mentioned critical thinking that there was a time where I was and I had never heard of critical thinking. And so I was, you know, complaining, I guess, to one of my partners that um that I wasn't smart. And he was like, "Yes, you are." And I'm like, "No, I'm not." And I was like, I don't know. I don't remember things from school. I don't know all these book, things. And he was like I was like, I just kind of absorb and like with like words and stuff. I try to figure out the meanings of them by context clues. I was like, I just use context clues throughout life. I
Mhm.
don't actually know anything. And he's like, that's critical thinking.
Yeah.
You have an amazing ability at being a critical thinker because you ask the questions you don't know.
Yeah.
And you get in, you pick up on things. And he's like, and I think that is more important being a critical thinker than being book smart because no rote memorization does not equate to intelligence.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that has kind of stuck with me to remind myself that I am smart, I am a critical thinker. And like I figure out I figure things out. I make, TikTok videos, and I didn't go learn anything. I didn't, I didn't know what I was doing. I just trial and error figured it out, and I was like, "Oh, this does this. I got it." And I figure out all these programs, and like I figured out some coding and stuff that I just like figured out on my own. Or in my art, I recently did a picture for your partner actually. And I was using a technique where I cleaned up my lines. And it just because what I did was I painted out the lines for the picture, and then I painted in and didn't worry about necessarily going over some of the lines, just not
Mhm.
too much. And then I went back, and because I could still see mainly where the lines were, I cleaned up and relined it. And
Nice.
my husband told me, he said, "That's a technique.
Mhm.
That's an actual technique that you just figured out on your own because it made sense to you."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and he's like, "You are smart."
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's just that you've said critical thinking a couple times, and it just reminds me of
Yeah.
that that I had never heard of the concept of critical thinking until my partner brought it up.
Yeah, and I bet you were the kind of kid that asked questions that annoyed people, like their
Oh,
response was
yes.
annoying, but I that was your natural critical thinking coming out. I did the same thing.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
they're like, "I don't know, stop asking questions."
yeah, exactly, and that's the complete opposite of what we should be encouraging people to do.
Right? Always
but
ask questions.
always ask that's that critical thinking coming up, and it's always okay to ask questions. There's no dumb question unless you're asking in bad faith.
Yeah,
Um,
and, like, that's one thing that someone taught me, I don't remember who it was. I wanna say that it was my 3rd grade teacher. She was really important in my life. She which is funny because she came from that Baptist-costal, as I jokingly call it, church school,
yeah.
um, which she eventually got out of the religion. I've seen her multiple times because we live in the same town. Um, and but she really helped me. She realized that I struggled in school, and she saw me struggling, and she saw me.
Yeah.
And so, like, she would have me come over to her house because at the time when I was younger, I had a hard time spelling in my head,
Mhm.
and I had to sound it out
Yes.
loud.
Same.
Now it's the complete opposite, and I'm like, if somebody asks me how to spell something, I'm like, just a second, let me write it down.
Yeah.
But I'm just spelling it out. I'm sounding it out in my head. I'm just not sounding it out loud. And I think maybe that comes from internalizing so many things.
Mhm.
But so she would have me come over to her house, and she would give me spelling tests verbally. And so it was, but I think she was the one that told me, don't stop asking questions. There's never a dumb question.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Really good advice.
And that has stuck with me. I can't say for certain that it was her, but somebody told me that, and that has stuck with me, and I've demonstrated that to other people when I've been teaching them something. I'm just like, ask your questions. I will answer them as best to the best of my ability. There's not a dumb question. Don't feel like you can't ask me a question.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Well, let's see. Let's bring it back around. We're running towards the end. So,
Yes.
when it comes to spirituality, there are a lot of different ways to define it. We've talked about the actual definition, we've talked about our personal definitions, and then it also, those definitions affect how one is going to experience their spirituality.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like the quote I mentioned in the very beginning, where the quote unquote soul or spirit doesn't necessarily exist on a straight path, but it's not moving forward or linearly or straight up, but instead it opens and unfolds like a lotus flower, with many petals opening at different times and in different ways. And so our spirituality can and will look different from person to person. And so because of this phenomenon, in order to accommodate that, the multitude of beliefs there needs to be something that we all can all agree upon, and that to me would be empathy.
Mhm.
Because if we have empathy, then we can respect that other people can believe and practice what they choose as long as it doesn't harm others or promote beliefs that devalue the existence or rights of others. So, um, as long as that's not happening, you can believe whatever you want,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
explore your own personal journey.
Oh, for sure. That is, I 100% agree.
Yeah. Was there anything else that you wanted to, any final thoughts before we close?
No, I think that was a good final thought in and of itself, is that, we are free to believe whatever we want as long as we're not harming other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us for today's episode about spirituality. Hope you learned something, found something interesting, maybe a conversation starter. Let us know what you think. If you have any comments or questions or any requests of topics, the links are in our description. And we look forward to seeing you at our next episode. Any constructive and positive feedback is always welcome. And as we say goodbye, don't forget to love each other. Bye, everyone.
Bye.